Police officers of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing to happen on the job? Story 1. My girlfriend's grandfather used to be a detective, and he tells a pretty terrifying story. When he was still pretty young, he got a call to an apartment building because a monster was trying to get into someone's apartment. The caller said that they had heard a gunshot, and then a while later something was pounding on their door. When they opened it, a monster was standing there and tried to get into their apartment. They kicked it out and slammed the door. The caller also said that they had heard more screams from down the hall, so the monster may have been trying to get to other people. When my girlfriend's grandfather got to the building, he found a man shambling around inside covered in blood. He got the guy turned around and realized that he had found his monster. The guy had attempted to take his life by putting a gun under his chin and firing upwards. However, he had screwed the angle up and blown off his jaw and the part of his nose, but he was still alive and in extreme shock. He had been walking around the building, knocking on doors, trying to get someone to help him, but his grisly visage had terrified everyone, so they kept slamming the door in his face. Story 2. I hear the other guy on my beat get dispatched to a well-being check of an elderly lady. After a few minutes, the guy asks for a supervisor. A few minutes later, they dispatched me to the lady's house. I get there and the supervisor asks me to climb in through an unsecured window at the back of the house because I'm of smaller stature. I get to the window and tell it's to the bedroom. I can hear a loud television in another room and I can tell it's Fox News. I yell out, "Police, does anyone need help?" as I climb in through the window. I hear an old raspy voice call, "Here." I ran out of the bedroom down the hall to where I heard the voice call from. From the living room, I see a lady laying face down in the dining room area. I called out to her, "Ma'am, did you fall? Where are you hurt?" I run to her and she is not moving. I touch her hand and it is ice cold. She's dead, been so for a few days. I unlock the door and let the supervisor and other officer in. I tell them I heard a voice and we need to check the whole house. No one else was in there. I know the TV was on, but I could tell it was the news and heard the voice over it. Story 3. I've had a few creepy moments in my career, but one that has always stood out to me was a call I had when I worked the midnight shift. It was around 2 a.m. in the dead of winter. Bone cold that night, and got a call from dispatch that they had an open 911 call and could hear a woman moaning, "Help me," and then silence. My partner and I arrived at the apartment to find the door slightly cracked open and had a blood smear on it. The apartment was black inside and strangely quiet. We made an entry. It was like something out of a horror movie. The first thing we both noticed was a large arterial spray on the wall that then smeared down to a hallway and disappeared toward the back of the apartment. As we made our way down the hall, blood was smeared down the wall to the bedroom. Blood covered the door handle. We opened the door and saw a lifeless body on a bed, covered in blood, the bed and body. Unbelievably creepy. It was dead silent still in the apartment. We checked the body and found a faint pulse. The woman was still alive. Turned out she was blind and had other health problems. She had a shunt in her arm, which she had managed to pull out, by mistake, we later found out, and she started bleeding out everywhere. For those curious, she lived. Though that was 8 years ago, I still remember the creepy quiet and staleness of the apartment in the bitter cold. Story 4. My history teacher's brother, I know, not me, but whatever, is a cop, and my teacher told us this story. On Halloween night a few years back, the cop was called to a costume party being held on an upper floor of an apartment complex, a noise complaint or something. He got to the apartment building close to midnight and, right as he arrived, he saw a blur of motion and heard a loud, wet smack. He located the point where the blurry figure landed. Laying on the ground a few feet from the door was a corpse that had fallen some 9 stories from the party. He had hit the ground going pretty fast, head first, so the top of his head had exploded and scattered throughout the front lawn. What's even worse, the lower half of his head was still intact, but had lodged itself inside the man's chest cavity. His neck was broken in several places. He was dressed as Batman. Story 5. I worked in a small town in Ohio called Celeryville. My daughter was up one night clipping her nails and decided to draw back the curtains and look out the window. She, to her surprise, is staring face to face with what appears to be a werewolf. Keep in mind that the window was about 4 feet off of the ground. I didn't really believe her, but I saw the fear in her eyes and walked around the perimeter of my house with a pistol and flashlight. Whatever was there was gone. A week later, me and my coworker busted a Peeping Tom who would dress up in a werewolf costume so that no one would identify him or believe witnesses. Story 6. I mean, there are a lot of hysterical and awful stories in police work, but creepy. I guess it's the folks on drugs, more specifically PCP. They don't feel pain, and the drug pushes their body past breaking points that under normal conditions the body would not be able to endure. 4. Cops and 2 firefighters trying to handcuff a 50-year-old average build guy on PCP. What makes it creepy is there is a compliance technique used very rarely where you turn the handcuffs into the wrist, causing unbelievable pain. Have had it performed on myself a few times. We got this guy in handcuffs and into the ambulance. As soon as we walked out of the ambulance, he tried to run in front of traffic to end himself. Used the compliance technique to get him to walk with me, but didn't do a thing. He kept screaming he was going to bite my face off. It was zombie-esque how he was acting. Took 2 rounds of sedatives to knock him out in the ER as we all held him down. The worst part was he was covered in blood from an earlier flight. Everyone had some DNA on that night. Story 7. Not a cop, but a security guard. I worked at a truck facility. I got a call from the spotter yard driver telling me to call an ambulance and to get back there ASAP. I turned the camera over and can't find anything other than some woman going nuts next to her trailer. I drive back there and find her screaming her head off about being sorry. Her husband had been adjusting the tandems on the trailer. This requires you to move a lever under it and move the trailer once it's in place. Sometimes they stick. So he told his wife to move the trailer while he held the lever up. The lever stuck, he slipped, and his wife ran over him with a fully loaded trailer. He was still alive when I got there. He didn't make it. We got the spotter to move the trailer so they could get the body out. Story 8. I used to be a tow truck driver. I've been called to a lot of really screwed up stuff, but I'll give you guys one story called to a scene of a death on the highway. I get there, it's a small sedan, and the young guy that's in the vehicle is bent overhead, pretty smashed in, and 2 hockey stick handles through his seat and then through his chest, cell phone in hand, middle of text saying, "Heading to game now, prepare to lose." I assume he meant lose. He had been looking at his phone, rear-ended the car in front of him, and then the car behind him hit his trunk, pushing the hockey sticks he had through the fold-down seat and through him. Story 9. My cousin is a cop and we don't get a whole lot of exciting stuff like in other states, but he works nights and used to be a K9. His biggest problem at night is tweakers out on their BMX bikes. I don't know if this is creepy, but he said it scared the crap out of him. He was driving down State Street in the middle of the night and nobody was out when all of a sudden a freaking BMX bunny hops onto his hood and some tweaked out guy in his sweatpants starts singing the theme song to Rad, jumps off and rides away. He got out and just let his dog chase him down. Story 10. I have a family member who works in narcotics in the California desert. He told me this story about the ghost car. So he was chasing someone on a major highway, not saying which one, but it's probably not hard to figure out. Lights and sirens and everything. The guy turns off his lights, swerves into the desert, and just disappears. He called out for another car to help him find the missing car. The tracks lead into the desert for a short while, then the tracks suddenly disappear. They had a few officers poking around the area, but nothing ever came of it. Never found the car. Strangely enough, this isn't the first time or the last time this has happened. Ghost cars are apparently pretty common among Mexican drug gangs. They've theorized that there's some kind of hidden underground drug lair out there somewhere, but nobody's ever found anything. In some of the narco corridors, they talk about having underground safe houses, so you might be onto something. I heard they only open from inside too. I would bring the cars up off the ground somehow, carry them a mile or so, then bring them in. A total alien looking thing too would probably cause some sort of local legend to scare people off. Oh god, I just wrote a Scooby-Doo episode. Story 11. My grandfather used to be the head of a crime lab. He told me he worked a case back in the day where a man had been murdered in his home while sitting in a chair in his study. His neck slit so deeply that his head fell backward and hung over the back of the chair, the mouth open in what looked like a really creepy grin. The chair faced away from the door, so the head looked straight at whoever would be in the doorway. So he is investigating the scene with the other police looking for evidence, but they had forgotten that animal control was coming to pick up the man's cat. So they let him in, and before they can say anything, he turns the corner, sees the door to the study wide open, turns green, and runs out about to cry. Story 12. This isn't really a creepy story or anything, but just horrific. My dad's a police officer, and about 15 years ago, he was called to a man's house where the neighbors had reported him for strange activity or something. When he got there, it was about 8 a.m. on a weekday morning. When he was getting out of his cruiser to go to the man's door, he noticed a school bus coming to a stop outside a student's house. The school bus put the big stop sign out and opened the door to let the student on. The girl, the student, was about 12 years old. She had to walk across the road to get to the bus. As she was walking across the road, my dad approached the man's door. He heard an engine rev and turned to see a sports car blow through the bus's stop sign and hit the little girl, sending her body flying through the air. My dad leapt over the steps and applied CPR on her for half an hour. There was no success. Story 13. I was sitting monitoring a stop sign late at night. Somewhere around 2-3 in the morning. The area was notoriously known for a gruesome murder that has still gone unsolved. While sitting there, I noticed something shoot across the back of my car in my rearview mirror. As I was looking in the mirror trying to see what was behind my car, the black shadow shot up the driver's side of my car, then across the front of my car. Creeped out, I realized it was time to get out of there and gunned it down the road. Our video cameras in the car are set to turn on automatically at certain speeds, so it turned on. I decided to review the camera to see if something really did cross in front of my car. During the point where something should have gone in front of my car, the camera went completely dark, like something blocked the lens. Needless to say, I didn't monitor that stop sign anymore. Story 14. I'm late to the thread, but I hope someone sees this. My best friend from high school is now a cop in Detroit. Within his first year, he has been bitten, stabbed, shot, and witnessed horrible things that could only happen in Detroit. There is one story that I will never forget, he told me. He and his partner had been called out for a welfare check. 2 young boys had not shown up at school for over a week. They arrive at the boys' apt and hear noise on the inside, but no one coherently responds to their calls. After receiving permission from HQ, they break in and find the APT filled with garbage and bottles of human waste. On the sofa was the mother, dead from overdose. There was a man, presumably the father, down the hall, half naked and shouting how it was the coming of Jesus and how all sinners were going to die. It took both officers to restrain him. Searching the apt, they eventually found the bots. Both had been locked in their shared bedroom the entire time. No food, no water, no bathroom. The younger brother suffered from exposure and dehydration. The older brother was dead and was stuffed in the mattress the younger brother had to sleep on. The younger brother now lives with his grandmother and the dad is in prison. Story 15. My dad was also a cop up in NY. For the Port Authority of NY and NJ, he worked at JFK Airport. One time they got a call about a trespasser on the runways that a pilot in a 757 saw. They interview the pilot, who is, well, being as hard as can be, the way he and his co-pilot describe it. A bipedal being standing as tall or taller than their 757 ran in front of them as they landed. The issue here is, well, they are quite tall planes. Also, they weren't going 20 mph. Whatever it was that tall and outran the plane. They said it ran towards the tree line, and due to the nature of landing a plane, couldn't stop what they were doing to see where it went after. My dad's partner asked him if they should go check out the woods where it would have gone, and I have to laugh. My dad looked at him like he was crazy and said, "Listen, it's the height of a 757 and able to run as fast as one landing. I don't want to find it if it exists." Their report basically chalked it up to pilot stress, although both pilots saw it. Go figure. Story 16. My mother's friend is a homicide detective. She and some of her colleagues were leaving work one night and had been competing over silly stuff all day. Someone suggested they watch the cars and see if their cop senses could spot a criminal. Mom's friend randomly points at one at the stoplight. She and her partner go over and tap on the window. The guy rolls down the car and after the general pleasantry says, "I asked my girlfriend." This was in a large city, so mispronouncing words was not uncommon. Mom's friend says, "What did you ask her?" Guy says, "No, I asked her. I hit her with an axe. She's in the trunk." She was in the trunk. She lived. Story 17, not a police officer but a Marine who worked at the Pentagon security for the CJCS. I was doing the night rounds at about 0200, 300 on a weekend, checking a ton of offices all over the place. Well, I get to the basement level and mind you, no one is anyone near these places. I hear giggling that sounds like 2 or 3 young kids. I know no one is supposed to be here, let alone kids. So I swing around the corner like a badass and nothing. I think it's all in my head and continue to my checks in this hallway. Next thing I know, the fire alarm lights on the ceiling go off. Now I'm getting that something's feeling off. I radio back to our control station and see nothing on their monitors. As I am listening to what control is saying, I hear kids giggling just behind me. I am totally freaking. I pretend to talk to the radio and slowly release grab and pull my pistol. I turn around and nothing. I try my best to control my fear and say, "F this hallway check." When I got back a bit earlier than normal, I just told everyone I jogged a little bit. To this day, one of the scariest 3 minutes of my life. Story 18. This was just a few nights ago. My husband is in the Air Force Security Forces. He got a call to respond to a 911 hang-up at some location he'd never heard of. He and the other person on patrol went to the location, and it was about a 40-minute drive into the middle of nowhere. They get to the building, and it is a completely abandoned huge building, like a warehouse or something. Everything is completely dark, and they check every room, and they even found the working phone. I guess if the phone worked, it hadn't been abandoned for too long, but they said they heard noises and still couldn't find anything. He assured me that they passed absolutely no cars on their way out, no houses, no sign of any other people. It's not the creepiest story, but he said for him, just to drive up to that building and going inside made his heart race, seeing how it was and why they were there. Story 19, I am sure this will get buried, but here goes. This didn't happen to me, but to a coworker of mine. He was a cop for several years and was called to do a welfare check on an old lady who hadn't been heard from in a couple days. They arrived at the house and noticed all the lights and stuff were off, so they walked around the house. Looking into a window, they noticed a body on the floor. Well, they didn't want to break in the door, so they found another window that opened up. They enter the house and call out and ask the woman if she is okay. No response, but they did see some movements. Upon closer examination, they realized it wasn't the lady, it was her cat eating her. Yes, that's right, her cat was going to town eating the lady. So my buddy yells at the cat to get away. Well, apparently the lady wasn't completely dead yet, 'cause she made a noise. That scared my coworker enough to send him and his partner out the exact window they had come in through. They realized shortly after they caught their breath that the woman was alive, so they called for an ambulance. I believe he said the woman actually survived the whole ordeal. Story 20. My dad always told me this story about a man who was walking along a very busy highway. Numerous calls were made and the dispatcher sent a few officers out to investigate. Upon the arrival of the man, they informed him that it is very dangerous to be walking this stretch of highway. His responses to the following questions worried the officers, including my dad. They found that all he was carrying was a large mason jar used for pickles, but there weren't any pickles in the jar. There was about a half-gallon of piss, a few apples sliced and bitten, and some toilet paper. The man's response for what's in the jar was, "This jar, in this jar, is the secret to life." Story 21. Cop here. The creepiest thing was when I was walking a beat on a solo foot post late one night. This was back in my first year on the job. My partner was on meal break, so it left me on the post by myself for the next hour until he got back. I decided to walk down from the north of my post to the south, past a few abandoned lots. As I passed one of them, I thought I saw something at the end of the lot by the fence line. Lots of times people using or just being vagrants will be in these lots. I shined my flashlight on the area, but nothing was there. Trick of the low lighting in the area. No big deal. As I turned away, the fence on the far side of the lot rattled, giving that distinctive chain sound. I stopped and looked back, already thinking of how ridiculous this feels, and put my light on there again. Standing there was a man. He didn't look homeless, nor did he look like the kind of guy that hangs out in lots late at night. I asked him what he was doing. He simply stood there, not really looking at me, but kind of above me. I asked again, no answer. I told him to come over here, as he shouldn't be in the lot. He just stood there. I decided to put it over the radio before approaching him. Post 4 Central, show me one male stopped at XXZ Street, back lot. No further, no emergency. So I walk into the lot, but have to hop a small fence to get to where he is standing. I figure this guy must be tweaking out or something. He looks like he has no idea where he is. I hop the fence and look back up. This motherfucker was gone. I took my eyes off of him for 2 seconds and he was gone. No sound from the far fence chain. Nothing. I scanned the entire lot wondering where this guy went, looked behind the only real cover, a dumpster, and inside of it, he wasn't there. Central raised me a minute later and asked the status. 1091-98, non-crime corrected, resuming patrol. To this day, I think I saw a ghost, as crazy as that sounds. I've never told anyone about what happened that night. Crazy, crazy stuff. I know there is a chance that maybe he just hopped the fence without me hearing it and took off, but in the amount of time it took me to hop a forest fence, highly unlikely.